The induction system is going to be made up of the hose that goes normally like beside the radiator into the air cleaner box, the air cleaner box, the air filter, the hose that goes from the air cleaner box back to the throttle body, the intake manifold, and intake ports in the cylinder head. Since we're covering the intake ports in the cylinder head, we'll just focus on manifold back for now. One of the debates that goes on in the fuel economy community is, do we want hot air intake or cold air intake? Now, which one's going to make the most performance and low end torque? I did some experimenting with it, and what I found was if you have a carbureted or TBI application where you have long wet flow, that the warm air intake added additional thermal energy to the intake charge to help the fuel vaporize better. But if you had port fuel injection, or worse yet, even GDI, direct gasoline injection, the cold air intake made more power and fuel economy. So that kind of comes into play there as far as how long of travel does the fuel have to make. So keep that in mind if you're thinking about a K&N cold air intake, for your vehicle. In most cases, you'll get the most benefit with just a simple drop-in cotton filter, like a K&N or an AEM. And I'm sure there's other companies that make them as well. It's free-flowing. You buy it once, and then instead of replacing it, you just simply clean it. So it becomes cost-effective over time, even though they're more money up front. And it also doesn't wind up in the landfill, which paper filters will, time and time again. There's something called a tornado. J. Kim invented it, got the patent. Spiral Max copied it, and it's like out there from China and everywhere else. But what it does is it spins the air as it comes in through the induction system. Normally you mount it, close to the throttle body. I played around with these and got rather mixed results. On some vehicles, it's like, whoa, the performance increase was there. There was better fuel economy. While on others, it just didn't work so well. And with my head porting, I decided to think about this and try to figure it out. What I discovered is on the vehicles where it worked well, they were usually, but not always, usually inline engines. So you had like a long platinum, and you would spin the air and it would come in, and the intake runners coming off the platinum into the engine just went that direction. And I found that if the spin was backwards, you got your platinum and you got your pipes coming off and you're spinning it this way, then the air has to make a change in direction to get into the intake runner. On a V8 or a V6 engine, normally half the cylinders would be working for you and half would be working against you. They wound up being like a wash. I mean, you didn't see gains, you didn't really see losses most of the time, but you just didn't see anything. It's like you wasted your money on the product. But like Ford 5 liter or 5.4 liters from the 90s, even though it's a V8, it has that big platinum and the runners all come off kind of at the tangent. So you can see gains on engines like that. The throttle body itself, most newer throttle bodies have some kind of a lip or a contour on the leading edge up to the throttle plate, and then a contour sometimes away into the intake manifold. Back when I had my speed shop, a customer sent me a 58 millimeter throttle body for a Chrysler product, and he wanted me to bore it out, get rid of that contour crap, as he called it. So I also had the flow bench. I put this contoured factory throttle body on the flow bench, I flowed it, and then I bored it out and I flowed it again. Now I wanted to show him what he's paying for. Here's, you're getting your money's worth, right? Except it lost flow. Those contours would straighten out the air, and it actually flowed more air. Even though the cross-sectional surface area was slightly smaller, it flowed more air with those contours. When you get into the intake manifold, whether it's dry flow, port fuel injected, or GDI, or a wet flow, TBI or carbureted, Helmholtz effect and velocity are still going to come into play. And in the exhaust section, I spend a little bit more time on that, but big ports are going to be slow and lazy. Small ports are going to have a high velocity. Now, if you're trying to rev up to 7,000 RPMs, you want the big ports because it'll flow more. But just normal driving, you get much better off-throttle response, you get much better fuel economy if you stick with the smaller ports. Also in the exhaust section, we go into something called the Helmholtz effect, where when the intake valve closes, you got that mass in motion, hits it, bounces back, creates a vacuum here, and then kind of sucks the charge back in. And if you can open that intake valve while the charge is going this way, now you get kind of a ram air effect. And again, longer, smaller diameter pipes on your intake are going to give you better fuel economy and low end throttle response. Shorter, fatter pipes on your intake will make more horsepower at red line. So for the street, now if you look at the picture, bottom left, that one's got the really long small port runners. That would be my choice. If you have like an old carbureted V8, you can get single plane or dual plane style intake manifolds. For fuel economy and low end performance, the dual plane almost always makes better power and fuel economy. So you don't want like a Torquer style with a Dominator carburetor and expect to get 30 miles per gallon. Back in the 90s, before the internet, I spent a lot of money with H&A Industries in Bowling Green, Missouri. They sold books, booklets, pamphlets. They sold information. I spent a lot of my disposable income with those folks. I learned about Charles Pogue and a whole bunch of other great minds through that purchasing. One of the things that I bought was originally dated somewhere in the 1920s, and it suggested drop your fuel tank, wrap it in wax paper, and then wrap it in tinfoil, and then wrap it in wax paper, and then wrap it in tinfoil. Do 3 to 5 layers and put it back up in. Now, with what little I knew at the time, I'm like, oh, hell no, that's garbage. Then I learned about this guy named Wilhelm Reich, and he focused his life study on something he called orgone. It's life force energy. It's chi, ki, prana, a lot of different names for it, but he called it orgone. And he actually had electric motors running on orgone, modified like gasoline engines running on orgone. I mean, this guy understood life force energy like no one else. He was the first to put numbers on it. He designed meters so that he could measure it.